Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Monsieur le Président du Conseil des droits de l'homme, Madam Chair, Excellencies, dear and numerous representatives of multiple and diverse minority voices, it is my pleasure to welcome you to this 17th edition of the UN Forum on Minority Issues. Before any other consideration, I first need to thank the Chair for having accepted on very short notice, as was already said, the difficult task of chairing this assembly for the 2 days ahead of us all. Past editions of this forum have shown that it is not always an easy task. I do not expect this year's debate to be any smoother or uncontroversial than before. I just hope that the debates will be intense but constructive. This is with this purpose in mind that I am very glad to have at my side for this year's forum the very experienced and wise Anastasia Quigley as a chair. Thank you, Anastasia, for having accepted this role. I also extend my thanks to the President of the Human Rights Council, who, during his year of presidency, has regularly had an attentive ear for the demands coming from my mandate of Special Rapporteur on Minority Issues. Thank you. And naturally, my gratitude also extends to the Secretariat of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, which is working very hard behind the scene to make this important and singular forum possible. And finally, a special thanks to the interns from the University of Geneva who provide me with intellectual support and substantial research capacity at all times. One of the reasons for me to appreciate this inaugural moment of the 17th edition of the forum is the fact that the number of registered participants is higher this year as it has ever been. The counting has been stopped last week at 690 registered participants. It is both a satisfaction to see this UN Agora attracting so many civil society organizations and, unfortunately, an upcoming frustration for most participants, as well as for myself, that the forum, as it is strictly constrained in its duration, will make it difficult for every voice and every participant to fully convey their message to the UN. The repeated demands to enlarge the format of the forum to at least a third working day, not to mention a possible path towards a permanent forum, remain unanswered and unsatisfied by UN member states. And this is, unfortunately, far from being the only frustration that I need to express today. As we can all witness daily with sadness and disgust, the respect for human rights throughout the world is not the rule. Quite on the contrary. The pushbacks against human rights is severe and strong, putting an ever-increasing number of human lives at stake, pushing human rights norms and standards on the edge of collapse. The recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family, that is the foundation of the international protection of human rights, does not seem to drive the policy choices and the conduct of a growing number of governments around the world. To tell you the truth, I am ashamed to have to pronounce such a dark opening statement. And in such dark time, the rights of persons belonging to minorities are even further at risk, history showing that when the respect for human rights and dignity falters, it is those which already were suffering discrimination, as is too often the case with persons belonging to minorities, that are the hardest hit. And as if that wasn't yet bad enough, persons belonging to minorities run the additional and unfortunately very common and real risk to become scapegoats. This is against this bleak background that we are gathered here to exchange and debate on the minority representation and self-representation in public spaces and discourses. It may sound strange that in such dire circumstances, we focus on representation of minorities and not on their rights or on the protection tools. I personally assume the choice of this theme. Representations, perceptions are what guide actions. Rights or protection tools are what limit actions. The idea behind exploring representations and self-representation is to work upstream, not only trying to correct wrongdoing or discriminations against persons belonging to minority, but to work on the perception of the place and role in society as a whole of persons belonging to minorities. These perceptions and portraying of minorities do shape public policies and rules applying to minority groups. The representations of minorities in society as a whole impact the effective participation in decision-making, as well as in cultural, religious, social, economic, and public life. Self-representation of minorities in public spaces, in educational material, in media, and in the arts is key to the substantial and positive contribution of minorities to society, with a view to change the societal perception of minorities and promote recognition of persons belonging to minorities as constitutive and valuable parts of more open, cohesive, and diverse societies, as the High Commissioner has just emphasized. Fair representation is twofold. On the one hand, states must ensure that persons belonging to minority groups enjoy equal rights without discrimination on any ground. States must take appropriate measures to facilitate the fair representation of minorities through law, public policies, as well as regards the equitable distribution of resources in public space. On the other hand, the portrayal of minorities in public spaces and discourses is indispensable for acknowledging the positive contribution of minority to society as a whole. Yet, this can only be achieved by strengthening the agency of persons belonging to minorities. Drawing on the self-representation of minorities in the public portrayal is an essential way to ensure respect to whom they really are and to counter racism, stigmatization, and inferiorization. I therefore hope this theme and its exploration will allow the recognition of the fact that discourses and symbols do also matter for the social recognition of minorities. Self-representation by persons belonging to minorities who must be able, in no way impeded, to express and promote their identity is key to achieve this goal. In parallel, fair representation of persons belonging to minorities by outsiders of the minority group is an essential component of inclusive and diverse societies that aim to leave no one behind and where persons belonging to minority groups can thrive. Finally, let me remind all participants that this forum was instituted by a Human Rights Council resolution adopted in 2007. This resolution invites a Special Rapporteur to include in his or her reports to the Human Rights Council thematic recommendations of the Forum and recommendations for future thematic subjects for consideration by the Human Rights Council. Under the current format, the numerous contributions to the Forum, your 2-minute statements, and this is based on my experience of last year when I was just inaugurated my mandate. These 2-minute statements make it difficult to identify converging elements in all the statements made by participants to support clear recommendations to the Human Rights Council. I therefore need to make all participants to the forum aware that the agenda of the Human Rights Council is very crowded. I'm sure you will agree with that, Mr. President. If recommendations emanating from the forum that I will convey to the Human Rights Council want to stand a chance to have any impact, they should be few, clear, and with strong support from stakeholders. I am well aware, and I fully support, the use of the forum as a platform for all minority voices to be heard at the UN. This is why, due to the limited time available for each intervention, I realize it will be difficult to fill the dual purpose of having, on the one side, your minorities organization voice heard, while contributing on the other side to a potentially impactful recommendation to the Human Rights Council. However, providing me with strong elements for recommendation to the Human Rights Council would contribute to enhance the relevance of the Minority Forum within the UN human rights architecture. In very practical terms, you have to know that for the first session, we have too many speakers, and not all will be able to speak this morning. We will not postpone the start of the second, third, and fourth session. They will go as planned, but there is spare time, most likely on Friday, to have those contributions to the first debate that will not have been possible to make today, to be made tomorrow. So, beyond these practical issues, I am very eager to hear your contribution to the lively debate of the forum with all the aforementioned elements in mind, and I wish all of us and each of you a fruitful participation to the 17th edition of the Forum on Minority Issues. Thank you.